think it's time to blow this scene. Get everybody in the stuff together. Okay, 3, 2, 1, let's jam.
¿Qué tal, amigos de Documentos Clasificados? Una semana más y les tenemos un noticiononón. Les tenemos un invitado espectacular. Y como siempre, es un placer saludar primero a mi compañero y amigo Jaime Carreño allá en Canadá. ¿Cómo estás, Jaime?
¿Qué tal, Daniel? ¿Cómo están a todos? Así es, efectivamente tenemos un invitado espectacular el día de hoy, como siempre.
Pues preséntalo, estimado Jaime.
Muy bien. Bueno, pues tenemos hoy con nosotros a uno de los dibujantes encargados de dibujar y participar en uno de los eventos más importantes de la década de los 90, la muerte de Superman. Y es nada más ni nada menos que el gran dibujante Jon
Bodganove.
Ok. Jon, how are you?
Gracias, Daniel.
Thank you for being with us today, Jon. And we can start right away on the interview. Jon, right now, I want to talk about a little bit of some of the topics right now. Have you seen Justice League?
No, I have not seen Justice League. I didn't see it when it was in the theaters because I was aware of the problems with it. And I've been meaning to see the Snyder Cut, but I just haven't had 4 hours to devote to it. So I hopefully will get to see it. I have a lot of friends who say it's much improved. I'm hoping the best.
Okay, well, that's it. Well, then let's change a little bit. Have you seen the new CW Superman series, Jon? Because you are more related with the Superman.
No. Although I know somebody who works in the writer's room there. But no, I haven't seen it just simply because it's I've been busy and I don't get very much television time, actually.
Oh, I see.
It's on the list. On the list.
We can always talk about all different things. But anyway, Daniel, you want to talk about... Daniel,
Oye, Jaime, yo le preguntaría a Jon si lo que estamos presenciando con el Snyder Cut será el futuro de la industria del cómic. O sea, veremos sagas de 4 horas, veremos ya más series de televisión que los mismos cómics, que ya no sé cuál sea su postura con respecto al presente de esta industria.
Jon, Daniel is asking if, as we had some discussion with some creators about the superhero line comics is struggling a little bit. What's your opinion on this? Do you think we're going to start seeing more like these kind of sagas where the TV or movie companies are creating these 4 hours or these series for the properties of comics rather than seeing more comics published? What is your opinion on this?
I think that's possible. I know I'm not much closer to the companies than you are, but my understanding of things at DC right now is that Warner's does not see comic books as being much of a moneymaker. It's not. Comics don't make enough money. So what they really are interested in is the characters, because the characters are property that make money on television and the movies. And although I understand that kind of thinking, Even it seems to me that if comics can even pay for themselves partly, they are still a valuable research and development place. Comics are an idea farm. Comics are where all these great franchises and profitable intellectual property comes from. It comes from, when you boil it down, you don't invent a Superman by committee. You don't invent the Avengers by committee. These are all of these characters are the product of the work and dreams and playtime of small individual creators who were pretty much allowed to do whatever they wanted, right? So comics have rarely, in the history of comics have rarely made a lot of money. They've always sort of been on the fringe edge of publishing, and they were inexpensive to begin with originally. So they've never been a high profit business in themselves, but it is from the toys and the games and the movies, the videos, and all the licensing of the characters that real money is made. If a comic book sells enough copies to pay for itself, historically, that's a win. There are only a few times in history where comic books themselves have turned a big profit. Superman in the 1940s, for instance, was literally selling in the millions and was a massive profit generator, even without the radio show and the cartoons and the serials. That hasn't happened very often. One other time it's happened was, brag, the death of Superman. We sold billions of comics then, and and DC made money on the comics then. But for most of comics history, comics have been an idea farm. They've been a place where new ideas and new stories and new characters are developed inexpensively to fruition. And by the time those ideas are ready to have hundreds of millions of dollars invested in them in a movie, they have already become part of our global mythology. And that's the value of comics. That's why it's good to keep comics around, because it's an inexpensive way to farm new properties. And also it helps build those properties to the point where there's enough public recognition of them that they can sustain a big movie. So, I know that DC there's been talk at DC of stopping the publishing of physical comics altogether and going to digital only. I'm not sure that's a mistake. I personally like to hold a comic book, but for decades now, the only print comics that have made money are the trade paperbacks, the expensive collected volumes that you buy in a bookstore. So the traditional used to be 10 cents comic book, generally speaking, doesn't sell enough to justify its print run, generally speaking.
I see.
And so to save money, I think DC wants to keep publishing comics, but publish them digitally only. And then for collectors, collect whole storylines in a trade paperback. And that may not be a bad direction. although personally I will miss old-fashioned comic books. But in terms of a business strategy for the company, that may give creators like myself book deals more similar to what novelists get, which is usually an advance against royalties, which could conceivably, well, it would work out best for the best-selling characters. It won't work out so well for people working on minor secondary background characters. But I mean, it looks like that's the way the industry is going anyway. So all we can do is see how it goes and try to adapt. If comic book artists and comic book writers can't make a living doing comics, the companies will just have to change. But let's see how it works with digital only. I don't know. I like comics digitally. I think they're beautiful on the screen. But also I like having the physical artifact. I like reading the physical artifact. I don't like having to have a screen in order to
feeling the smell of the paper. I guess we are old-fashioned way guys.
Paper. I like the smell of the ink. I like to be able to sit out under a tree and not be staring at projected light. And also, I like the fact that when I buy a physical comic book, it's mine. And I can keep it, I can trade it, I can sell it, I can pass it down to my son. If comics are digital only and you let your DC Unlimited or your DCU subscription slide, then you no longer have your comics. So you have to stay subscribed. So you're not owning your comics anymore, you're renting your comics, right? And there's no ownership involved. So for that reason, I like having the artifact. Besides just the enjoyment of reading a book, I like having an artifact that you actually can keep.
Yeah, I guess because you, as you say, you are just paying to being able to log in and rent the comic to see it, but you don't own it. Good point. Daniel?
Adelante tú, Jaime, te toca.
Bueno, voy. Muy bien. Okay, now let's shift a little bit on speaking on the comics anyway, Jon. Could be great to talk about, in our previous conversation we had, you talk about a little bit of the background of how Superman, the dead Superman started and everything. But now I want you to tell me, how was your feeling, if you can remember, I hope so, when you were, if I'm not wrong, the first artist who actually draw Doomsday fighting with his green jumpsuit and starting to develop that character. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Well, I didn't think at the time how historic it was to draw Doomsday for the first time. So I think the honor of that sort of missed me. At the time, we were given a Xerox copy of a drawing by Dan of the containment suit. And I thought it was a little bit strange that there were no bony protrusions showing. He was just a smooth figure. I rationalized that by thinking the bony protrusions only happen as he activates, which is why, as the fight went on, I think I and some of the other artists drew more bony protrusions more bony protrusions. So he got bonier and protrudingier. Is that a word? As the fight went on. And that sort of fit with Dan's concept for the character, which is a character who evolves and adapts according to his situation. So he grows more armor as he's hit harder.
Now, speaking of that, I have two questions before then Daniel can jump in. I have two questions for you. So right now it's like, so it was Dan Jurgens, obviously, who designed or have the first concept of the Doomsday, how it's supposed to look like. Is that correct?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. Actually, Doomsday, the character, before he was named Doomsday, was a drawing by Dan that he did before we ever thought of killing Superman. In other words, Dan always, we all tried to do this, but Dan was the best at this. We were always trying to invent better villains for Superman to fight. You know, back when we started, Superman's rogues gallery included the Prankster and the Toy Man and Brainiac and Lex Luthor. And none of those main villains are someone that Superman can punch. If he punches any of those guys with his full strength, they'd vaporize, right? So part of what we were doing in our attempts to upgrade Superman was to give him more characters, more villains, more opponents that he could hit. And one of Dan's strengths is that he would come to every meeting with at least one character design of somebody Superman could hit. And so on that fateful meeting, that super summit, where we decided maybe we would actually kill him, Dan had come in originally with these drawings of Doomsday. And he wasn't named Doomsday, he was just a villain, a Hulk-like villain that he hoped he could introduce to Superman's rogues gallery if we could find a place for it. It was a good design, as pretty much all Dan's designs are good. But none of us at the time, at the start of that meeting, thought for a minute that he would become as important as he became.
So my second question, this before I let Daniel talk, ask you a question is, so who has this brilliant idea? Because for me, it's a brilliant idea, is that it's not Lex Luthor who kills Superman. It's not Brainiac. It's Doomsday, a brute, a force of nature who kills Superman just because he can kill it. Who was behind that idea? Because you mentioned it before, it was a little bit of an idea of Jerry Orway and Louise Simonson of killing Superman.
Yes.
But decide the idea, who will kill Superman? Who came with that idea, if you remember?
As I remember, people started to throw out ideas, right? And they all sounded terrible and flat, right? None of us wanted to give any of Superman's traditional nemesis the pleasure and the honor, right? Luthor did not deserve it.
Really?
And we knew that Superman needed, the one thing we knew was that Superman needed to die defending the Earth, saving the Earth. His last action, he had to give his all to save the Earth. And it was pretty much unanimous. This is one of those magical moments that used to sometimes happen in the super summits, where we all just said, I may have said, actually, I don't remember, Superman needs to die saving the Earth. So it needs to be a big fight. Needs to be a big fight. Might have been Wheezy, might have been Roger Stern. But it's something we were all thinking at the same time. So it could have been any one of us. It could have been all of us, actually, individually, who just decided that this is not something that any of his current bad guys could have done. There was some thought of Darkseid, but to use Darkseid or Mongol would forever tie in the death of Superman with Jack Kirby's fourth world. And we really wanted this to be only about Superman. We wanted this to be a standalone epic, an important chapter in Superman's myth. So it had to be a Superman-only villain. It had to be a villain that only Superman could handle, and that had no history with anyone else. So that took out Darkseid, that took out Mongol, that took out any of Superman's rogues gallery, because the story needed to stand alone. And as a result,
He started with me.
Elevated to the position that he has now.
Wow, that's interesting. That's really, really, really nice to hear that, John. Really, I never heard about that story. Anyway, Daniel.
Bueno, yo quisiera preguntarle con respecto a lo mismo, mi estimado Jaime, que el autor material de la muerte de Superman fue Doomsday. Eso lo están platicando. ¿Quién fue el verdadero autor intelectual de la muerte de Superman? O sea, sabemos más o menos parte de la historia, pero ¿de quién detonó la idea de decir vamos a matar a Superman? Uno, y el número dos es que si es real esa versión que se dice que tuvieron que matar a Superman por el hecho de que los cómics no estaban teniendo el auge que tenían antes y tenían que buscar un detonante, y este era perfecto, el buscar la muerte de Superman.
Perfecto. John, Daniel is asking a question that we want to a little bit think about what we discussed before. Is many people know that Doomsday kill Superman, but some people of the story saying that who was the author of saying, hey, let's kill Superman, and that was behind. The idea was because the comics in Superman were selling, but they were not selling that good, and you guys, the creators behind it, want to show the world that Superman was important, and you made it. So you don't mind telling us a little bit about that again?
Well, sure. I mean, and I may have mentioned this before, but the idea to kill Superman had been a long-standing running joke. Whenever we were all at the Super Summit and we were trying to figure out what happens next and what the next story arc is going to be, and whenever we got stumped for an idea, Jerry Ordway in the back would pipe up and say, and then Superman dies. Then we kill Superman. And everyone would roll their eyes, really chuckle politely and roll our eyes and move on. And that happened again when, we had plans to marry Lois and Clark off and have a big wedding issue. And that got postponed because Mike Carlin and Jeanette Kahn had this nice idea to have a crossover with the TV show, so that if Lois and Clark got married on television, then Clark and Lois in the comics would get married at the same time, and it would be a stunt and successful, and it would have been. But that effectively erased all the stories we had set up for that year. And we had to, after 3 days of meetings, we had to go back to the beginning and start over. So we're all sitting in the room thinking, well, okay, if we're not moving them toward the wedding, what are we going to do? And of course, Jerry, as always, said, oh, and then we'll kill him. But this time, Louise Simonson, who had been editor of the X-Men and had presided over the deaths of many characters, said, you know what you get when you kill a character is you get the opportunity to show what that character meant to the rest of the world, to his friends, to his enemies, to the world at large. You get to do the funeral. And the funeral lets you show how much that character meant, right? And she talked about a little bit about the time they killed Colossus for a while. And we talked a little bit about, poor dead Doug, who was still dead. And so as Wheezy talked about the storytelling value of killing a character, that triggered our hearts because everybody in that room had grown up watching George Reeves on TV, in reruns in the 60s. And everybody in that room was a Superman fan. At that point, there was nobody in there who was just in it for the job. Everybody there was there because, we were fans. We loved Superman. And this was sort of a dark and gritty era in comics. And the kind of characters that were popular at that time were like the Punisher and, Spawn, Wolverine. And I think a lot of people just tended to overlook Superman. And we wanted them to be reminded of why he was important and why we cherished him so much. So long before we ever started to talk about the fight, long before we ever thought of Doomsday as being the monster, we wrote the whole funeral for a friend arc. That actually happened first, because what Louise said triggered all our emotions. And we all started talking feelings from our childhood, what Superman meant to us, and how we could translate that into a story, and what character could express this aspect, and what character could express that aspect. And we wrote these wonderful scenes, Bibbo's moment of "it should have been me," or Louise had this wonderful moment where John and Martha Kent are watching the funeral of their own son on television, like regular people across the country, because they can't be there, right? And nobody knows that they're grieving their child. So we wrote all these emotional scenes before we ever even thought about how Superman would die.
That's it's absolutely amazing that situation that you're telling us about Superman. Daniel, es verdaderamente increíble cómo John nos dice ahora que al momento de iniciar la creación de la muerte de Superman, primero pensaron en el funeral más que en la muerte, lo cual me hace brillante. Y pensar que Jonathan y Martha Kent están viendo el funeral de su hijo y verlo no poder asistir, y eso lo trajo Louise Simonson, simple y sencillamente brillante.
Increíble.
Guaje tener una más, Daniel, si quieres. Todavía tenemos un poco de tiempo.
Bueno, yo le preguntaría a Jon, también, mi estimado Jaime, que nosotros vimos una serie de televisión de Lewis y Clark en los 90s y ahora está iniciando otra. Están cambiando verdaderamente los personajes conforme pasa el tiempo. Digo, la industria que nos tocó en los 70 cambió, en los 90 cambió, y ahora en el 2000, en esta década del 2020, pues está cambiando. ¿Qué piensa él de estos cambios que se generan constantemente?
John, I know we mentioned it before that maybe you're not watching the Superman series right now in CW, but let's talk about the concept. As you mentioned it before, in the 90s, there was the Lois and Clark Superman series, and now this is a new series. Have you seen an evolution on how the movies and the TV is portraying this?
Well, first of all, generally speaking, I am a fan of the CW shows. I think that by and large, they've done a lot toward, how do I put this? For quite some time, DC seemed to think, or Warner seemed to think, that everything that DC made on film had to be like Batman. Because, The Dark Knight had made a lot of money. Batman movies had always turned a profit. And so people thought, well, okay, let's get rid of all the bright colors. Let's make everything dark and grim and gritty. And that kind of thinking held sway a lot. That's why Zack Snyder's costume is sort of maroon and grayish blue, not bright blue and bright red. It's just, there was just an element in Warner's that thought Batman is successful, make everything like Batman. What I admire very much about the CW crew and the animation department, for that matter, is that they had the courage to say, no, every one of these characters is completely different from Batman. Batman is his own unique thing. Each of these characters is unique, and each of them has their own inherent charms. Even the silly stuff, even the dumb stuff has value if you are true to it. So we get, that wonderful Flash show, for instance, which, yes, it's made for a teenage audience, but that's really the audience for comics to begin with. And what I love about what are they called, the Arrowverse or the CW shows, is that they don't shy away from the silly stuff. They combine drama and comedy with action by running right at everything DC set up. So if there's a giant shark man, they'll have a giant shark man. And King Shark is very popular now, but Killer Shark before him. A college friend of our son's, a fellow classmate from Emerson, played the elongated man. And just like in the comics, they ran right at the ridiculousness and humor of the elongated man. So what I love about the CW shows and why I'm looking forward to seeing the Superman and Lois show, or the new one, whatever it is because they really are, I think, trying to honor the source material. And even when they change stuff, they are trying to capture the intrinsic charm, the charm that is born in every one of those characters.
Okay, good. Never thought about that, but you're right. It's like giving everybody its own flavor. It's like Batman is no Superman and Flash is no Batman. And
right.
The Green Arrow is no Flash either. So yeah, I think never thought about that. Thank you. I'm so glad when we had the chance to talk to you creators, because you see the things in a completely different ways as we do fans. Daniel?
Well, it's
go ahead, Jim.
Binge watching the CW shows is a very gratifying experience because, for instance, again, to take Flash for an example, and I love Flash, and I love Supergirl, and I love what's the name of the future ones there?
Legends of Tomorrow.
Yes. I really enjoy those shows a lot. I like Green Arrow. He's kind of Green Batman, but that's okay. But if you binge watch those shows, you can see them starting in a mindset of, we have to be serious. Everything has to be like Batman. For instance, Grant Gustin's first season Flash suit was sort of a muted brick red, wasn't bright, right? By season 3, his second and third costumes looked like they were drawn by Carmen Infantino. They were bright red, bright yellow. They had the courage of their conviction. And that's what I love and admire about the CW stuff. That's what I love and admire about the animation department, is they have the courage of their conviction. They are not ashamed to be DC. And I think that DC for a long time suffered a little bit from geek shame. And they really wanted to make everything, they wanted to take all these ridiculous concepts that DC has built up over 80 years, all these silly stories and crazy ideas, and they wanted to make them serious and adult somehow. And I'm glad that era is passing. I'm glad that the people who are running those shows now can find the drama where the drama is, but also don't hide from the comedy where the comedy is. And if there's an idea that seems ridiculous for television, they try it anyway. And I love that. I love that.
Thank you, John. Daniel?
Also, for instance, and it's spreading into the movies too. Like, I saw a preview for the new Suicide Squad movie, right? Starro is in there. And it's not like the Fantastic Four movie where Galactus had to be some sort of amorphous energy cloud. No. Starro is a big starfish.
Okay,
you know,
Daniel?
It's the right direction. It's the only possible direction for DC. You can't pretend that DC is Marvel. You can't pretend that everything is DC. DC is Batman. You have to look at why these characters have lived for 80 years and go with their strengths.
Thank you, John. Okay, Daniel. No te oímos, Daniel. Estás en mute, perdón.
Pues nos vamos, mi estimado Jaime. Gracias, Jon Bodganove. Gracias por estar con nosotros. Nos tenemos que despedir. Tenemos un minuto, Jon. ¿Cuál es tu cómic favorito? Así, dinos rápido, ¿cuál es tu cómic favorito? Y ahorita te pedimos otra cosa.
Okay, Jon, quickly.
Is it
What is your favorite comic book?
Or my favorite comic when I was growing up?
Your growing up.
Growing up. The first comics I remember growing up, I was offended by.
Okay.
I was a huge fan of Superman on television. And when I saw the comics, it was sort of right in the middle of the 1960s. So the Superman stories then were pretty silly. They were pretty silly.
But you were saying one of your favorite comics was growing up was Superman, but there were some issues that you didn't like. So you can elaborate a little bit.
No, my earliest exposure to Superman wasn't comics at all. It was television. So it was the George Reeves TV show. I really liked Superman and the Mole Men, for instance. And I very much liked sort of, I mean, if you look back at that show nowadays, a lot of it seems pretty silly. The black and white seasons are a little bit less silly. But even in the silly stuff, there is something kind about George Reeves' portrayal. His Superman is very fatherly. You know, it's almost like Clark is the dad and Lois is the mom and Jimmy is the goofy kid and Perry White is the grumpy grandpa. So the Daily Planet staff felt like a family, and George's Superman was kind and patient and forbearing, and never indulged in anger, and that was my concept of Superman. And I also had no idea that he was blue and red. But anyway, so when I first started to see Superman comics, it was like Superman's too fat to fit in a phone booth, or Superman and Batman have to kill each other, or Superman is only worried about keeping his identity secret from Lois, and he's doing all these humiliating things to Lois to keep his secret identity. They were stories that, even at 4 years old, I thought were bullshit. But I had grown to love Superman on television, and here were these comics that seemed to be making fun of Superman and portraying Superman as a petty person whose main interest in life was making fun of Lois, and who was deathly terrified of anybody finding out who he really was. And I really think that era of comics says way more about the people who were doing comics then than it does about the character. So I stopped reading comics for a while because of that. And then one day, like in second grade or something like this, I saw my first Marvel comics. Kid in school had these comics. And I actually saw my first Spider-Man comic on the newsstand. And I can tell you which one it was. It was Steve Ditko's last issue of Spider-Man, just a guy named Joe. And it had this great cover pose of Spidey on it. And it was unlike any of the DC comics at the time. I couldn't believe how the action seemed so alive and so dynamic and so exciting. And, it gave me the feeling that the Superman, I used to watch the Superman show, and when the show was over, I'd tie a red towel around my neck and go jump off the neighbor's garage. Because, those shows filled a little boy with a desire to run around and be Calvin and Hobbes, except my Hobbes was Superman. And the Marvel comics did the same thing. A kid at school had a copy of Fantastic Four, and that's the first Jack Kirby stuff I ever saw, and it absolutely blew my mind. I didn't know who Jack Kirby was. I didn't pay attention to creators then. It never occurred to me that people actually draw this stuff until I read the credits. So, oh, wait a minute. Oh, it's drawn by people. It's written by people. Who's this Stan Lee guy? But so Marvel Comics opened my eyes to comics again, blew my mind. And I became an instant Marvel Comics fanatic. But Superman was still number one for me. And then,
I know that.
Yeah.
Of course.
This is the guy whose son is named Kal-El.
Exactly. It's okay.
So
That proves that.
as a kid, Superman was number one. And I actually used to think, why can't Superman comics be like Marvel comics? And then when I was 13, Jack Kirby left Marvel Comics and came to DC, and he started to draw the Jimmy Olsen comic book, which meant Jack Kirby was drawing Superman, writing and drawing Superman. And I didn't care that they were redrawing all his faces. I mean, it was jarring and annoying and unnecessary, but the storytelling, Jack brought Jack wrote and drew the Superman that was real, that resonated with me. It was like, yes, this is it. At last, it really is like a Marvel Comics Superman. And I was hooked. And that's when my phase of fanatically collecting comics began. And I couldn't miss any of them. And that's when I would go to used bookstores and look for back issues and stuff like that. And it was actually through Jack's Jimmy Olsen that I discovered Jerry Siegel and Joe Shuster's work, because around that time there was a collection of Golden Age stuff published by Crown. Superman from the 30s to the 70s or something like that. Anyway, it reprinted in black and white a lot of the original Joe Shuster work. And I saw the direct line of connection. What Jack was doing in Jimmy Olsen resonated with the Golden Age version, the original creator's version of Superman. And so I became quite a student of all of that stuff. And I started to learn the various artists who worked in the Schuster shop and, all the nerdy stuff. But so if I'm answering the question, what's the most influential comic book of my childhood? It's hard to pin it down. It's either that first Spider-Man, that first Fantastic Four, or that first Jimmy Olsen drawn by Jack Kirby. Somewhere in there is when I learned that comic books were the greatest art form ever created by humans.
Oh, I see. Muy bien, ok, muy bien. Daniel.
Oye, Jaime, yo quisiera, aprovechando que tenemos un poquitito más de tiempo, hacerle alrededor de 10, escúchame, son 10 preguntas, pero él tiene que contestar con una sola palabra.
Okay.
Lo primero que se le venga a la mente. Que se le venga a la mente. A ver, ahí va la primera. Serie de televisión favorita.
Okay, John, here's a set of questions that we are only asking you to give us one word, the first word that comes to your mind when you hear the question. Okay?
Sí.
Okay, here goes. First, TV series.
What about TV series?
TV series. Superheroes TV series.
Oh,
Una.
Superman, The Adventures of Superman.
Que nos diga ahora, Jaime, Marvel o DC.
Marvel or DC?
DC pays much better.
There you go.
La otra. Que diga el nombre del primer linterna verde que se le venga a la cabeza.
John, if I say Green Lantern, who is that guy? Who will be that guy?
Who's Green Lantern? For me, it's Hal Jordan.
Yeah, who's Green Lantern? For you, who is Green Lantern?
Hal Jordan.
Jordan, of course.
Muy bien.
Me too.
¿Thanos o Darkseid?
Darkseid is much smarter. Thanos lacks imagination. Thanos' big problem is he doesn't have any imagination. So Darkseid is a clever foe. He's intelligent. So and I think Thanos is an idiot.
Love it. Okay, Daniel.
Thanos's final solution is so unbelievably flawed that I just think he's a moron. He's a monomaniacal moron. He's fixated on this one thing, and it's not even going to solve his problem. If he's worried about overpopulation in the universe, his solution will only last for a couple of generations. because in a couple generations, reproduction will have filled up the universe again. So he hasn't solved anything. It's just Thanos is an idiot. He's a moron. So dark side.
¿Cuál es su cómic favorito, Jaime?
Ahorita, actualmente,
Sí.
John, I don't know if you're reading comics at this time, but if you're reading right now, what is your favorite comic at this moment?
This moment.
Or maybe you don't have it.
I've just been rereading Squirrel Girl. I've really enjoyed the Jimmy Olsen series that was last year. Big fan of Dan Slott's and Joel Red's run on Silver Surfer.
Okay.
Love that. I've really enjoyed Neil Adams' work lately. I know that most people think it's too weird and too zany, but there is something incredibly genuine and direct about what Neil is doing now. It doesn't matter if all the crazy shows, doesn't matter if it's very eccentric. It's genuine, real comics drawn from the heart. And I love that. Generally speaking, the comic books I like are the ones that are drawn from the heart.
Y ahora sí, las últimas tres, Jaime. Las últimas tres nada más.
Okay.
Lo primero que se le venga a la mente, el nombre de un dibujante de cómics.
Okay. Just one word. The first name you come to you. Comic pencil. Who?
Kirby.
Jack Kirby.
Jack Kirby.
Escritor.
Writer.
Jack Kirby.
Great.
Entintador.
Inker.
Favorite inker. I have many.
Come on, John. One.
All right. This is very hard to pick. The reason it is hard to pick one inker is because an inker's strengths depends on who the penciler is. So someone who is brilliant, say, inking Jack Kirby, might be terrible inking Neil Adams. So every inker is very different, and it's really hard to isolate only one. You know, I would say I prefer inkers. I like inkers who bring something to the table. I like inkers who are finishers. So, for instance, John Romita or Sal Buscema or Dick Giordano or guys that could go in and finish someone's work. Some of my favorite comics in the world, and probably my one of my favorite comics in the world is the run on Spider-Man that Gil Kane penciled and John Romita inked, where Gil was basically doing layouts, and then John was doing finishes. So he was more than inking. He was adding detail. He was finishing faces. He was improving the drawing with his own knowledge. He wasn't just tracing. He was collaborating. And I like that. I like when I work with an inker. I like someone who brings their own good judgment to the table and that their judgment is compatible with mine. So, for instance, my favorite inker for my stuff, hands down, was Hilary Barta. I think Hilary Barta is a genius. because Hillary's own style is very different from mine. But somehow he connected with what I was trying to do in a way better than any other inker I've ever worked with. He wasn't slavish to my pencils. He didn't just trace, but he was true to the spirit of my pencils. So if he changed something, he actually improved it. I've worked with a lot of wonderful inkers in my day. Usually if I work with like a fan favorite inker, I'll try and cater to that inker. For instance, when I knew that John Romita Sr. was going to ink me on a cover, I tried to draw for John Romita. When I knew that Klaus Janson was going to ink an issue of Man of Steel, I drew for Klaus because, I'm fans of theirs and I want to please them. And I know it usually works the other way around with the inker trying to please the penciler. But when you have good partnership and you really collaborate, then the inker wants to please the penciler and the penciler also wants to please the inker. And you work together and you get something, you get a sum that is greater than the separate parts.
I see. Okay, Daniel.
Pues para finalizar, Jaime, lo que tú le quieras preguntar.
No, ya nada más quiero agradecerle a Jon por su tiempo, realmente ha sido muy amable con nosotros en estos días, dándonos más tiempo de lo que normalmente nos otorgan otros, y eso quiero agradecerle, nada más. Entonces, si quieres, déjame agradecerle y entonces nos despedimos. Jon, thank you very much for your time. It was really, really nice. It was so wonderful talking to you. You have always have to say, and you let us know things that normally we don't hear from other artists. You are telling us the things what are happening behind the curtains and what you're feeling, and we really appreciate that. Thank you very much, Jon. And we just hopefully we will see soon again.
Gracias, fellows. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay,
Muchas gracias,
Daniel.
muchas gracias a Jon, muchas gracias Jaime, muchas gracias a todos los que sintonizaron Documentos Clasificados. Nos estamos viendo en 15 días con un invitado también especial. Muchas gracias y hasta la próxima.